staying begins to feel heavier than moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean the path you're on is suddenly wrong, and it doesn't mean change will be easy, but something inside you begins to recognize that continuing exactly as things are requires more emotional effort than it once did. You may still be capable, you may still be respected, you may still be succeeding by every external measure, but internally you begin to feel a kind of weight. Not a crisis, just a growing awareness that your growth may be asking for something different. And when that realization begins to appear, it often leads to deeper questions. Hello, welcome to the Shattered Mindset Podcast, wisdom from life's turning points and defining moments. I'm your host, Melvin Larry, and I'm excited to be here to share something with you. Look, have you ever had one of those quiet moments where you're just sitting somewhere, maybe driving, maybe walking, maybe just staring out the window for a minute, and a thought shows up that you really weren't expecting? Something like, is this still the right direction for my life? Ever thought that? Now, the interesting thing about moments like that is they usually don't show up when life is busy. They tend to show up when things get quiet for a minute. Maybe you just finished accomplishing something you've been really working on or working toward, and maybe you've reached the level of success you once hoped for. Maybe life looks stable on the outside, but inside, a small question starts appearing. Is this still where I'm supposed to be going? Now, here's what many people don't realize. Moments like that are not random. They're often signs that something inside you is evolving, signs that who you're becoming may not fully match where you're currently standing. And if you ignore those signs long enough, life has a way of getting your attention later. But if you learn how to recognize them early, those signs can become some of the most valuable guidance you ever receive. So today, I want to walk through 7 of the signs that often appear when it may be time to look honestly at your direction in life, not to force decision and not to rush into change, but simply to see clearly what may already be unfolding in your life. Sometimes the first sign that it may be time to reconsider direction shows up in a way that surprises people. Progress stops feeling meaningful. Now, this one can be confusing because on paper, progress is supposed to feel good. You may move forward, you accomplish goals, you build things, you achieve milestones, and for a long time, those things do feel meaningful. But there are moments in life when something strange begins to happen. You keep achieving things, but the satisfaction that once came with those achievements begins to fade. You hit the goal, but the celebration feels a little short. You reach the milestone, but the fulfillment really doesn't last. You even accomplish things you've been really working toward, and instead of feeling energized, you feel quiet, maybe even a little empty. And sometimes what you're experiencing is a sign that the version of success you're chasing may no longer match the person you're becoming. There's a metaphor people often use that captures this moment well. Sometimes we spend years climbing a ladder, working hard, making sacrifices, pushing toward and forward step by step, only to reach the top and realize something important. The ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. Now, that realization doesn't mean the climb was wasted. The discipline you built, the lessons you learned, the strength it took to climb, wow, all of that still matters. Okay. But what it does mean is that success alone isn't always the final answer. Sometimes the deeper question becomes, is the direction of my effort aligned with the life I truly want to build? When that happens, people often assume something is wrong with them. They think maybe they're tired, maybe they're burned out, maybe they're being ungrateful. But sometimes that's not what's happening at all. Sometimes what you're experiencing is a sign that the version of success you're chasing may no longer match the person you're becoming. And that realization can feel unsettling because many of us spend years building a path. We work hard, we sacrifice, we invest time and energy creating something meaningful. And it takes courage to admit that something which once felt right may no longer feel the same. But wisdom sometimes asks a different question. Not just can you keep going, but should you keep going in the same direction? And another sign that often shows up around the same time is the energy you once had for something begins to fade. Now, this isn't about having a difficult week. Everyone gets tired sometimes. What I'm talking about is something that unfolds gradually. There was a time when what you were doing energized you. You woke up thinking about it, you were excited to build it. The effort didn't really feel heavy, it felt meaningful. It's like a gentleman said once, hey, when you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life. Okay. But look, somewhere along the way, the internal spark changes. You still show up, you still do the work, but the enthusiasm that once drove you forward doesn't feel quite the same. And when that happens, many people assume they just need to push harder. But sometimes what you're feeling isn't laziness, it's not burnout. Sometimes it's simply a sign that your internal compass is beginning to point in a different direction. And sometimes the reason energy shifts is not because you failed, it's because you've completed a chapter. And that sign often shows up as you begin imagining a different path more often than you used to. Not recklessly, not impulsively, just thoughtfully. Look, your mind occasionally drifts into questions like, what would it look like if I use my experience somewhere else? What would life look like if I approached things differently? Now, these thoughts don't necessarily mean you meant to abandon everything you built, but they are signs worth noticing because imagination often begins exploring new directions long before clarity arrives. Now, this next sign appears when success and fulfillment begin to separate. Earlier in life, those two things often travel together. You pursue goals, you achieve them, and accomplishment brings satisfaction. But later in life, a person can reach a point where they are objectively successful and still feel a deeper question forming. Questions like, is this how I want to spend the next 10 years of my life? Is this the place where my experience can make the greatest impact? Those are great questions. Those are not questions of failure, those are questions of alignment. One more sign that often surprises people is curiosity. Curiosity begins pulling you somewhere new. You begin feeling drawn toward ideas and topics or possibilities that weren't on your radar before. You start reading about things that capture your attention. All right. You begin having conversations that stretch your thinking. Curiosity is powerful. And very often, curiosity shows up even before courage does. Long before we feel ready to make a move, curiosity begins asking questions. It kind of pushes and nudges you toward the ideas or the conversations and possibilities we might not have considered before. And those moments aren't random. Sometimes curiosity shows up because something inside you is already evolving. Your experiences have changed you. Your perspective has expanded. Your priorities may be shifting a bit. And because of that, things that once held your attention, it just may not feel as compelling anymore. While new ideas suddenly begin to spark your interest. In other words, curiosity is often influenced by the season of life that you're in now. The things that pull your attention today may be very different from the things that energized you 10 or 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. And that doesn't mean you're being distracted. Sometimes it means your growth is pointing you toward new areas where your experience can expand. Curiosity has a way of pointing us toward places where growth may be waiting, places where our experiences, skills, and perspective may be ready to unfold in a new way. How about that? And sometimes another sign begins to appear when something around you that once fit comfortably starts to feel differently. Your environment begins to feel smaller. Now, and that can be a confusing experience too, because on the surface, nothing may have changed. You still understand the work. You still know how to operate within that space. You still have the experience, the skills, and the ability to perform at the high level that you have been. But something inside you begins to sense that you've grown beyond what once felt like the right fit. Now, in a way that makes you feel superior, just in a way that makes you feel ready, I guess, for something that stretches you again. Sometimes the conversation begins to feel repetitive. Topics that once energized you now feel like discussions you already had many times before. The challenges that once pushed you to grow begin to feel more familiar than stimulating. And occasionally you find yourself thinking something quietly. Maybe I've learned what I was meant to learn here already. Now, that doesn't mean the environment is wrong, and it doesn't mean the people around you are doing anything wrong. It simply means that growth may be asking for a new level of challenge because personal growth has a way of stretching us beyond places that once felt like home. And when that begins to happen, it can be a sign that life is preparing you for a new environment where your next level of growth can just truly unfold. And eventually, one final sign begins to appear for us. Staying begins to feel heavier than moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean the path you're on is suddenly wrong, and it doesn't mean change will be easy, but something inside you begins to recognize that continuing exactly as things are requires more emotional effort than it once did. You may still be capable, you may still be respected, you may still be succeeding by every external measure, but internally you begin to feel a kind of weight, not a crisis, just a growing awareness that your growth may be asking for something different. And when that realization begins to appear, it often leads to deeper questions. Questions about purpose, questions about how you want to spend the years ahead for yourself, questions about whether the direction that brought you this far is still the direction meant to carry you forward. And that's often the moment when reflection becomes important, because recognizing that feeling isn't about rushing into change, it's about understanding what that feeling may be trying to tell you. Now, if you've recognized yourself in several of these signs today, I want to say something clearly. Recognizing signs does not always mean you have to do an immediate about face. It just means something inside you may be asking for reflection. And reflection is often where wisdom begins, because the direction we chose earlier in life was based on the knowledge and opportunities we had at that time. But life changes us, experience shapes us, and sometimes growth brings us to moments where we pause long enough to ask an honest question. Is the direction I'm moving still aligned with who I'm becoming? For some people, the answer will be yes. For others, the answer may still be unfolding. And that's okay, because clarity rarely appears when we rush. Clarity appears when we're willing to look honestly at where we are. Hey, if your furry friend is overdue for a spa day, let me put you on to Wolfgang Bakery and Grooming right here in Marietta. These folks do it all, full grooms to coloring, whatever your pet needs to look fresh. Their expert groomers are true pros, and they take great care of every pet that walks through the door. They've got your pet style covered. Now, here's a part you'll love. As a special offer for new customers, your first full groom or mini groom on pets 40 pounds or less is just $75. That's a strong offer to get and keep your pet looking right. You can call them at 470-523-8068. That's 470-523-8068 to schedule, or stop by 2500 Dallas Highway, Suite 540, Marietta, Georgia. And when you go, make sure you mention Shattered Mindset Podcast, all right? Or use the code mindset/Wolfgang so they know you came from this podcast. Wolfgang Bakery and Grooming, Marietta. So just to bring this together today, we talked about several signs that often appear when direction may need to be reconsidered, when progress stops feeling meaningful, when the energy begins to fade, when your mind starts imagining another path, when success and fulfillment separate, when curiosity pulls you towards something new, when the environment feels smaller than it once did, and when staying begins to feel heavier than moving forward. And if today's conversation made you pause and think about your own direction, I put together a simple reflection guide that walks through the ideas we discussed today. It's simply a tool to help you slow down and consider what signs might be showing up in your life. You can find it in the show notes. And if nothing else, I hope today's conversation reminds you of something important. Your life is not meant to be lived on autopilot. It's meant to be examined, understood, and directed with intention, because the direction of your life will always be shaped by the choices you make and the awareness you bring to those choices. And sometimes the most powerful step you can take is simply pausing long enough to see clearly where you are before deciding where you want to go next. So until next time, keep adapting, keep evolving, and keep reaching for those new and higher horizons. I'll see you the next time on the Shattered Mindset Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone you know. Take care, take charge. God God bless.